Growing up as a first generation Cuban Lebanese child of immigrant parents, it was really interesting.
I grew up in Miami. Both my parents are Cuban. My parents actually immigrated from Mexico. So both my sister and I were born in the States.
I am a first generation Hispanic immigrant. I moved to the States when I was 4. I come from Peru. Most of my family's all Peruvian.
Both my parents being from Mexico was very much a day in, day out thing. Speaking Spanish in the household, the food we would eat.
It was very much the norm for me to have a dual identity. My parents made a big effort to make sure that we were celebrating the holidays as well. So we had Dia de los Reyes Magos, and at the same time we celebrated Santa Claus.
In the first few years, I was doing a lot of work of assimilating, getting the free lunch at school as opposed to bringing a home cooked meal that was probably 20 times better than what I was eating.
My mom always packed lunch for us. She traditionally packed us foods that weren't, a sandwich and a bag of chips. It would have been kafta or hummus or baba ganoush or ropa vieja and tostones. Today, you'd all be drooling, but believe it or not, back in the day, it wasn't, kids didn't understand what that food was. My sister and I would be called names, or the food would be called poop.
In undergrad, my roommate's family would take us out to lunch, and once they took us to a Mexican spot and we sat down, she was like, "Oh, and Adriana, what should we order?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. This is your favorite spot. You tell me." And she's like, "Well, what does your family make? What do you guys eat at home?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. Not Mexican food usually."
There was clearly a lack of awareness or even exposure that was causing this.
Moments that made me feel like, oh, I'm being asked to speak for a group of people by someone who maybe doesn't totally understand what they're asking from me.
I specifically remember the first times I'd have friends over, and they'd eat my mom's cooking, and they'd be like, "Wow, this is the best Mexican food I've had." And that for me was a very bright spot of this is something that is just an everyday part of my life. It's part of who I am.
When I graduated and got my first job, I moved to Salt Lake City. And on our way to the bar, this lady actually came up to us and she said, "Oh my goodness, you guys are so ethnic."
The hardest thing was kids hearing my parents speak for the first time. There was always a sideline comment about my dad's accent, or laughing when my dad says something, because he might have said cheek instead of chic, or chipotle instead of chipotle, and things of that sort. I laugh because I don't know what else to do at this rate. Did at times make me feel that perhaps I wish my dad didn't speak that way. And then as I got older, I recognized that's not what I should wish for. I should wish these kids have exposure to things that they clearly don't.
So first gen is kind of a big term nowadays. It stands for first generation student, at least in my context. It could also stand for first generation citizen. My older brother, me, my younger brother, we're all kind of first gen students, especially in the American education system.
I'm a proud first generation college graduate. It goes back to what my family sacrifices were to be able to come here and give us a better life.
Pretty common for a lot of immigrant families, and also just for a lot of families that have been in the States for a while, but might have come from more low-income, blue-collar backgrounds.
I do think that it comes back to the socioeconomic piece of where people, the cards that they were dealt in the life that they're living. The studies have come out that a lot of people who unfortunately did not make it were because of, one, they just didn't have the access to healthcare. There were a lot of people who, before, they were almost never really even seen, and then all of a sudden they became the essential workers, the people working at the grocery store and the people picking the vegetables and making sure that we were fed. So that in itself is just an example of how people were even more exposed to contracting COVID. Not everyone was getting that stimulus check. They are just not naturalized citizens or not naturalized residents. And because of that, they were actually not eligible. And unfortunately, those are people who were already living within the poverty line. So for me, it was very, very hard to be concentrating about work when I knew that there were people within my community that I grew up in that I knew could barely even make ends meet. It was really the first time that I realized what it feels like when everyone in a place is very similar to each other, but very different from you.
Unfortunately, I would say a lot of microaggressions at work that I didn't know were microaggressions at the time. When I would walk into a meeting, people thinking I'm the assistant, being tasked to, I don't know, get something, get coffee.
I felt like I was having to like research the topics that came really naturally as like pleasant conversation to my colleagues, figuring out the rules of golf or, trying to talk to people about skiing.
I don't sometimes realize in the moment when something gets said and it kind of hurts a little, but it hurts more later on.
To be perfectly frank, I'm very white passing. I've had a lot of passing comments from people who didn't necessarily know I understood and spoke Spanish. And I've had a lot of passing comments the other direction from people who might have thought I was white. Both ways, when you hear things that aren't necessarily positive, it kind of reminds you, and you're like, oh, this is how my experience is a little bit different than maybe some other people, even if we look the exact same.
Social situations also felt like it was like more work, a feeling of always being on. And I think I really realized it for the first time when we had a sort of like a social event with name tags, and I spotted somebody with the last name Gonzalez, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna go sit there. Like, this is gonna be a moment of rest for me. My, now friend Gonzalez, last name, happened to be like from the same frat as all the other guys at the table. Like, have all these things in common that, again, I felt like I wasn't part of. So it was sort of the first moment that I would notice myself hungry for that and reaching for that, and then feeling disappointed when it wasn't what I expected.
So in HMA, we call each other familia because that is what we think we are to each other.
It has helped me feel like Kellogg is at home for me from day one.
They were the first group of people that reached out to me when I got to Kellogg to invite me to things, to make sure that I felt a part of something or anything.
People are from different countries, but at the end of the day, we do have a lot of commonalities. We love music, we love to eat.
People like that we can just, introduce ourselves and have them pronounce our names correctly on the first go, and like hear our music and greet people with kisses.
And most importantly, we love dancing, because that's what the HMA is most known for.
I went to a Kellogg barbecue like at the beginning of the year. And I mean, I wasn't born in Latin America. I've never lived there. Like you could say I don't have like the right to be part of something like that, but they were super welcoming. It was just this moment of like, okay, a lot of things are super scary right now. And like, this is all going to be really hard, but there's a group of people that like loves us, welcomes us. And walking out of that barbecue with a fellow Triple M, I just looked at her and I was like, I think we're going to be okay here.
I was in a client-facing meeting. A manager who's not my direct manager happened to approach me after the meeting. It was about my attitude towards the client, that I have had a very aggressive attitude and I had to be more amiable and I think he said warm. So at that point, I was like, this is something that might affect my quarterly evaluations. He might tell my manager. So I actually went and talked to the client. I just let her know that I apologize, that if I have in any way, shape, or form been aggressive towards her or not listened to her carefully when she said certain things. She basically flipped out. And she was like, why would you ever think that? I'm so happy you speak up. I value your opinion. I value your honesty. Who told you you're being aggressive? And I just turned red. I was so embarrassed. I didn't even think twice to consider like where the information was coming from. And I realized through her reaction that I wasn't the problem.
In corporate settings, it's hard to be a vocal ally because you just don't know. At least coming from my type of background where you're told to just kind of try and fit in, be able to get as far as you can to build upon, all the hard work and efforts that your parents and, everyone else has done. It might be hard to rock the boat a little bit and actually stand up for certain things.
I think an ally is someone who, when things happen, you reach out, you make sure that you tell people that you see what's going on, that you're there with them, but it's more of like you leave it up to them to respond. It's more about just making sure that people understand that you're there for them whenever they need help. Kellogg, although it's trying to diversify itself, it's not a place where there are too many people of color just yet.
Kellogg is a good place where you can voice concerns, where you can work towards change and not be afraid to do it, being mindful of the fact that you will have to put in work. And don't be discouraged if you don't see it right away. A lot of these changes require time and require the help of a lot of people.
Everyone is beyond welcoming. Everybody wants to facilitate everybody else in getting to know each other and meeting each other and in understanding one another.
At the end of the day, it's really about like telling your story and being open and vulnerable about who you are.
there's no one way to be whatever affinity you identify with. Whatever way you feel like represents you as whatever affinity you classify as, that's right, that's true, that's honest, and you don't really have to justify that to somebody, I don't think.